Okay, so right now I'm in top plan view. My resolution's really big, so you can't see everything. This is our little view menu, and I can see that if I click on this, I'm in. Here's our top plan view. Again, these are and this does have bottom here. Top, front, right, bottom, back, left, and the right isometric, left isometric, rear. So all those views that I just went over with the numerical keyboard that takes shortcut keys for those are here as well. Now, like I said, the multiple viewing panes is the shortcut key M, and if I press M, oh, it's going to take some time, it automatically breaks my drawing screen up into 4 separate screens, views. So I have my custom main, and it tells me what views they are. So for instance, I'm top plan view here, right isometric here, and top plan main floor. So these are the same views actually. Now there's there's multiple ways of getting in and out of this multiple viewing pane. So like I just pressed right, was the shortcut key was M, but this icon here, and if I hover over it, it says multiple viewing panes. So I can just turn that off and turn it back on if I choose to do so. I can also go up to my view menu and go down to this multiple viewing panes, and I can see that it's enabled, and I can just click on that and it will disable the multiple viewing panes. I can also right click on any of the menus and disable the multiple viewing panes from there. You can see that it maintains the view that from the menu that I just disabled that option from. So if I wanted to, for instance, go back into top plan view, I could disable it from here, and then this would bring me into top plan view. Or if I wanted to go back into my custom view, then I could disable it from there, and that keeps that custom view. Now there's 4, and I can go within each one and manipulate and navigate just like I would a regular drawing pane. And for now, like, I'll just draw something quickly so you can see that as I make these changes, it changes in the view and the other views, and I can see how it's going to look. For instance, this shape, it's in an isometric view, or a skewed view, and here I can see that in top plan view it's just going to be a square. Now what I can do with the viewing panes is I don't have to have 3. I could have 1, I can have 2, I can have 3, I can have 4. So you can easily, as I hover over each of the borders, I can see that this stretchy arrow shows up. So for instance, I could just expand, so right now, depending on which view I want to keep is the direction that I'm going to go in. So if I want to keep my top plan view, I'm going to go to the left, and it's going to get rid of my custom view and now make this top plan view the whole space. So again, I don't need another top plan view, so I can just shrink that this way. And I can also just make it 1 if I want to. And I can change my views by right-clicking. And I can see that right-clicking, if I want to go back to my 3, I can split this vertically, and then I have my 2 panes again. I can also split this one. I go up to the little title, the view title, and I can split this vertically as well. So you can play around with what you want to keep and how you want to organize your multiple viewing panes. So for this project, we are going to be taking your 2D tiny home and we're going to be developing it more in 3 dimensions. So we have already used walls, correct? Right? So those walls should already have height and they are already styled. And now what we want to do though is, because we created custom wall styles, when we're modeling, this is our opportunity to really, first stage of the project, we wanted to focus just on our 2D tools and the printing in black and white. But now, especially when we're modeling, we want to add color and we want to add detail. So we'll be using what is called textures. So right now, I'll just get rid of this. For instance, this is a wall style here. Now, there's different ways of adding height to our walls. We can go into our layers, and this is where especially we are going to have our drawings organized and especially have our drawing layers organized, because this is how those 3-dimensional objects are going to stack on top of each other. So right now I can see that here I'm in my organization palette in my design layers. I have my design layers here. I have my main floor plan, and remember for this plan I have an elevated level and then I also have a loft. So I can see that my ground floor starts at 1 foot 2 and my wall height is at 9 feet. And then my elevated level then goes up 22.5 inches from my finished, my ground floor level. So there's going to be the elevation or Z value for each layer. And then each layer is going to have an elevation height. So then if you create a layer on top of that, it's going to automatically take the elevation. So it's going to calculate, okay, your previous layer was, say, 0, elevation height 0, and the layer height of that, the elevation height of that layer was 10 feet. So my next layer then is going to start at 10 feet, right? Okay? So especially when we get into, we have already used walls. We are going to use the roof framer or the create roof tool, and we are going to be using slabs and creating floor assemblies as well. So I need to go to my main floor. I am there. I can't select that right now. It doesn't want me to let me select that. Okay. I will go out of this. So, and that's. I think so. Didn't I? Okay, I'll do a different file. Oops, not that one. Nope. Did it again. Okay. So for instance, on this plan that I'm working on here, I have a floor plan. I also have a roof plan, and that's going to be 2 dimensions. And then I also have a modeled roof layer. Okay, so that's a great way of organizing because there's going to be surface objects, which are going to be your 2 dimensions, and they're not going to render or rotate into 3D plan view. So we are going to, and you can see actually my roof elevation is at the incorrect height, but I can easily change that. So I just quickly rotated into my 3D view. The tool to do so, we can either use our shortcut keys on the numerical keyboard to change our views, or we can use this flyover tool, which is Shift C, or we can temporarily do so by pressing Control and pressing down on the scroll wheel button. Okay. So I am in 3D view right now, and see what happens with our two-dimensional objects when we go into 3D view. So that's why we want to separate them. So we might have a roof plan drawn out, but we are also going to be creating a modeled roof. So you want to make sure that's on a different layer. I'm going to turn my roof off right now. You can see right now though, this view of what the walls look like, what it's called is wireframe. So you're seeing every edge of the object. So even if I zoom in really closely, I can see like even this miter, I'm gonna see the corners and the edges. So these would actually be hidden, these rear ones, but it shows, it's like the surfaces are see-through. So this, how do we change the view is how we render our drawing. So if we go into the little tea kettle, this is our render menu, and I can see that I am in wireframe with this little check mark. There's also sketch, hidden line, dash line, polygon, OpenGL, RenderWorks, and then this is where we get into a lot of detail. Right now we can just do OpenGL, and this will give us a quick render of what of our objects with textures. So now I can't see within the walls, but I see the surfaces. There is lots of different fun styles as well. So I could do, so you can play with that because there is lots of different ways to render. The one that's going to give the most, yeah, right? So that is in our RenderWorks style. There's all these different styles that you can play with. OpenGL is going to kind of give us our quickest representation of all our objects with the textures. So you can see that I have a siding on this wall.
So it picks it up then?
It doesn't pick it up, it shows what's there. So if I select this wall, so far in our object info palette, we've been working under the shape menu. There's shape data, and then there's this render menu. So if I go into the render menu, I can see that this is my texture that is in this wall style. So there's different modes to do that. So right now it's saying by component, and it tells me, so I can do it by component or by object. I can do which part of the component or the object, and then which, right now this is the texture that is applied to this component, and which part of it.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So when you're creating
Your wall styles? Oh, darn.
when you're creating something and there's no like shape for it, like there's only lines, like you're working with
Right.
lines, there's no way that you're able to.
Yep. So, and this is why I've stressed to like, when we can create objects, right? For one, first and foremost, you can apply a fill. You can, even moving that object, instead of selecting 4 lines as a rectangle and then moving those 4 lines, if it's a rectangle, it's going to be one object and you can easily click and move it, right? So grid lines are great for like drawing and kind of guides and angles and all that. But when we start creating shapes, like, And that's why even with our double line polygon tool, there is the option to do create lines, and I always create polygons, because most often the case, if I'm wanting to create a separation, that separation is representing an object, so I'm going to want to keep it as an object together, because if we just create double lines, then they're separate, and then I can't manipulate them together, right? So first and foremost, if they're lines, they're going to have to be created to a shape, and then that shape is going to have to be created to a solid, right? So lines are 1 dimension, shapes are 2 dimensions, solids are 3 dimensions, okay? We're not going to kind of get into like extrudes right now. Right now, we're going to, for this project, we're going to be able to use most of the styled objects and plugin objects that are already existing. So without having to, so we'll get an understanding of 3D modeling without having to fully kind of create our own solids. We will get into that eventually, just not for this project. So when we created our wall styles, so for instance, if I have this wall selected, now if I go into my wall tool and I go to my wall tool preferences, so here is my, the wall. Let me just make sure. No. So I'm using, this wall is my exterior bearing 2x6 wood siding with rain screen. I can, for instance, if I wanted, oh, it's re-rendering everything. I wanted to edit the texture on the outside of this wall. I would edit my style. So if I want the entire style to be changed, I can see that along the top there's multiple menu options. Textures is the one that is going to be applicable for 3D. And I can see right now it says use component textures. So I can either use those component textures or object textures. So object textures, I can go in here and I can specify if I want overall, left, right, and where it is on overall, and then I can specify a texture. So here is my texture menu, and just like it's, for instance, doing hatches, if I click on here, this brings me into my resource manager, and this is where in this, on the desktops, on the school computers, there's only this default textures. There's still a lot of textures to use, but you can see, especially if you've made sure that you've downloaded these on your computer, that there is way more textures to choose from. We're just going to use the existing ones in the resource manager, but if I wanted to change the siding, for instance, I could easily do so. And all I have to do is click, I'll do this one. I'll hit OK. Now it still brings up that wall replacement dialog box because I've edited the style of the wall, but I'm not changing the thickness anyway. I've only changed the texture of the wall. So I can, all these, it doesn't really matter what reference lines are replacing what. So I can hit OK. And wait a second. And now I want to make sure that I'm in OpenGL so I can see the textures. Now, I don't remember actually which part I specified. And this is where we want to, it is better, I'm going to undo what I just did because I didn't actually want to do that, if it'll let me. Okay. If I go back into my edit style, So before I, and it's still, if I did my object textures, they're overall, so that texture would be applied to the overall wall, so both left and right side, and I don't actually want that, that's why I undid that. So especially if we've used our components, we can see that each component also has a texture, and those component textures are gonna override your overalls, right? So this is where my texture is, and this is that siding that's visible on the outside of my walls. And that's why it's also important to make sure they're drawn in the correct direction so that your outsides are on your outsides and your insides are on your insides. So I can see my gypsum board, which is on the inside component. I can double click on that. And this is that stucco white that we see when we rendered that drywall, and that's what that looks like. So it might look like it's just white or gray, but there's actually a texture to it. And even like, for instance, when we get into, we most likely won't get into it, but eventually you can get into where it gets more photorealistic, and your textures, you can actually add what is called bump values, so that they actually,
Thumbs bigger.
yeah, exactly. Have texture and can reflect off the bumps, right? So that's why how you get into photorealistic rendering. So up until this point, you guys you created new design walls, right? Those design walls don't have textures. So you're gonna need to go in and you're gonna need to choose and apply your textures to your wall style. Also, with our doors and windows, we are going to need to add more detail than what, for instance, I currently have. So I have my window right here. I can go down and I want to go into my 3D. So I want to show the sill. Whoa. Not that one. I'll turn that off. I can change that though. But in this case, we want to actually, when we've drawn our windows in plan view, they kind of, we don't have to change a lot of settings to make it look like what we want. It looks like a window, right? So we could sort of change the style. When we're doing 3D, we want to make sure it is the window style that we want. So if we want to add design features like buttons, we actually need to include those in our settings. So I included interior trim. I also want to include exterior trim, and I want to put trim under sill. So I can see how much more visually that looks like what it's supposed to look like. But for all my doors and windows, I need to make sure I have all those settings correct. Okay, so right now at this point, you already have your walls drawn and styled. You're going to need to edit your wall styles so that they have textures both on the inside and both on the outside. And then you want to go through all your doors and windows and make sure that they're styled how you would like them to be styled. So you're going to need to include your interior trim, your exterior trim. You can specify the thickness and what you want that to look like. And you can go through and make any changes that if you wanted to, for instance, include exterior shutters, you can do that. So play around, see what you want it to actually look like. Also, what you've drawn in your elevations using your 2D tools, you're going to want to make sure that that information is how it is reflected in your 3D model. Does that make sense?